So you recently published your June 2025 BNG pricing report. So what's been the key findings and what's been the reaction so far?
So the repricing report is something we've done, well, since BNG started. I think it's our fifth report now. It's become a bit of a monster of a job, I think, for the team to pull it all together. But essentially, we represent a huge swathe of the market at biodiversity units. And so what we're in a really great place is to be able to look at all the data on BNG prices and habitat types and be able to assess what's happening with price, scarcity, supply, demand, and also combine some of the platform's ability to look at demand, demand and where people want the units, etc., etc. So this pricing report is now got 77 habitat banks, and I think at the time it was created there was about 90 on the register. So like it's a big chunk of the market is covered, and we're really lucky. I should say that all the data is given to us anonymously by these habitat banks. So we individually can't reveal any of that information, but collectively being able to see that as from an English perspective, the whole of England, but also the north and south stuff's quite interesting. So yeah, the report came out in end of June, fifth report now, and it's starting to show some really interesting trends. So in the main, pricing remains relatively stable. I think if you dig into it, where you see big variations, that's actually on quite rare habitat types that might have only had two or three suppliers, and then there's another two suppliers that have popped up, and then it might look like a big change. So, but in the main, the pricing is quite similar. It's kept quite consistent. I always say to people, actually, a lot of people get quite obsessed by the actual prices of one unit, and actually often it's looking a bit beyond that data. So I'd say, for example, it's much more interesting to look at scarcity of habitats, what's available, what's in demand, and what you can find. And also often, from a supplier perspective, they rarely, in our experience, are they losing it based on the price per unit. They're losing it based on whether they're near enough to the developer, to the project they're compensating for. So a lot of people obsess about that financial number, but I actually think there's other things in the report that are a bit more interesting, basically.
And you mentioned this is your fifth report. What's been the sort of trends you've noticed in historical variance of pricing?
I think it's been a bit more stabilization probably over of you've almost got standard unit types that have early days fluctuated a bit and now settled, and then new rarer unit types which still show some variation over that period. Obviously, as well, I can't remember how many habitat banks we had at the first report, maybe 15 or 20, and so the number has gone up hugely. If you look at the Natural England Register right now, I think it's about 105. So the market's changed massively. The number of suppliers has changed, and actually, I think we'll talk about it in the BNG industry report. But what's great is you're seeing this real diversification of suppliers. You've got like these nationwide suppliers like Environment Bank that have got the most number of habitat banks everywhere, and then at the other end of the spectrum you've got like some small landowners that have got small unit amounts, but they're also able to play in this market now and sell their units.
Another feature of the report was the fact that there's more watercourse units needed. Why is this such a big issue?
There aren't enough. I mean, simply at the moment, there aren't enough watercourse units across England for coverage. So a lot of people are having to pay the spatial risk multiplier and pay double, Often a good thing about watercourses is they don't come up in huge volume. So people are actually after like a fraction of a unit, and therefore a compensation of two units, not too bad. I mean, we and ahed a bit about putting it in the report because it seems a bit alarmist, but actually what we've found is that it's a really good signpost to the industry of what people need to supply. Fully expectant within 6 months, we're not going to be saying, oh, there's more watercourse units needed. There'll be something else. So, and we do see that at biodiversity units. We see people come into the market with watercourses, but you do need them everywhere. So yeah, they are in demand and needed. And I guess if you're a habitat bank thinking about creating units, you should be, if possible, you should be thinking about creating watercourse units because you're going to sell them. But again, I'd go back to the point of like, if we think back to last October or November, which is like what, 9 months ago, 8 months ago, there was 19 habitat banks on the Natural England Register. There's now 105, right? So it's a very nascent market. It's very changing. At that point, people were saying, "Oh, there's not going to be enough supply." So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but I think it's something we want to fix.
And then there must have been some really interesting market insights that you found going through all that data. What do you share with what can you share with us?
I think one of the things is that probably a key market insight is around we're seeing that some areas of the country are particularly in demand. There are some key NCAs where there's lots of development needs, and so those habitat banks have more demand. And then there are other areas of the country where they're far away from development, and that's more difficult because there's less demand. But as an overlay to that, there's also we can see how many habitat banks there are in those areas. So, for example, a high demand area will be good for so long until there's enough supply to then temper that whole flux. So we're starting to see those supply demand dynamics, and the report actually mentions some of the top NCAs that are really needed and where there's sort of oversupply.
And what has been your personal reflection? Personally, what have you enjoyed most about this particular report?
It's been great for us to keep reproducing. I suppose it's like it's a great thing, and it's also what are we now? We're sitting there in August, and I'm thinking, oh God, we've got to do it again in September. So there's like a love-hate relationship probably coming on from that because it's a huge amount of work for the team and it's coming around pretty quick. But then equally, I think we hear it so much from the industry, from developers, but also from habitat banks, how useful it's become. And therefore, it's something we're committed to keep doing and improving. And like probably the last thing I'd say is we're really grateful to the partners that contribute their data because it wouldn't be as solid if it didn't, make up 85% of the industry.